The courtroom was silent in the way only powerful rooms can be silent. Not peaceful, not calm, heavy. Judge Marcus Ellington adjusted his glasses and looked over the 12 jurors seated to his right. They had been listening to testimony for 3 weeks in one of the most watched police misconduct trials in the state. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled every seat. Outside, protesters on both sides held signs and shouted across metal barricades. Inside, order ruled, and Judge Ellington was the embodiment of that order. Tall, composed, impeccably dressed in his black robe, the silver threads near his cuffs catching the light when he moved. His voice was steady, precise, impossible to ignore. "You will now retire for deliberation," he told the jury. Chairs shifted, papers shuffled. The jurors stood and filed out through the side door, their faces tight with the weight of what they were about to decide. The defendant, Officer Daniel Hargrove, stared straight ahead, accused of excessive force after a traffic stop turned violent. The city had tried to settle quietly. The victim had refused. And now the entire state was watching. Judge Ellington leaned back slightly as the courtroom emptied. Attorneys gathered their files. The bailiff stepped outside to escort the jury. That was when the side doors burst open. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. One older, one young. The younger, one broad shoulders, stiff jaw, freshly pressed uniform, scanned the room like he was searching for prey. "Court is adjourned for the day," the clerk said cautiously. The young officer ignored her. His eyes landed on Judge Ellington. "There he is," he muttered. The older officer hesitated. "You sure? Fits the description?" Before anyone could process what was happening, the young officer strode forward, boots striking hard against polished wood. "Sir, step away from the bench." The courtroom froze. Judge Ellington blinked slowly. "Excuse me? Step away from the bench and place your hands where I can see them." A nervous laugh escaped from one of the defense attorneys. "Officer, this is the presiding judge." The young officer didn't flinch. "We received a report of a suspect matching this description entering the courthouse." The description. Everyone understood what that meant. Judge Ellington rose deliberately. Not rushed. Not angry. Controlled. "Officer," he said calmly, "I am Judge Marcus Ellington. This is my courtroom." "Identification," the officer demanded. The bailiff stepped forward. "That's Judge Ellington. I've worked with him for 8 years." "Identification," the officer repeated, louder. A camera clicked in the back row. A reporter slowly lifted her phone. Judge Ellington reached into his robe pocket and removed his wallet. He held out his judicial ID. The officer glanced at it briefly. "That doesn't prove anything." Gasps rippled through the room. The older officer shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should call this in. We have a suspect description," the younger one snapped. 6'3", African-American male, bald, black robe. The words hung in the air like smoke. Defense attorney Carla Ruiz stood abruptly. "Are you seriously detaining a sitting federal judge because he is a tall black man in a robe?" "Ma'am, step back." Judge Ellington kept his voice level. "Officer, you are making a mistake. Hands behind your back." For a split second, no one moved. Then the metallic click of handcuffs shattered the silence. The young officer stepped forward and grabbed the judge's wrist. The room erupted. "You can't do this. This is insane. Call the chief." But Judge Ellington did not resist. He slowly placed his hands behind his back. The cuffs closed around his wrists. The sound echoed. Somewhere in the hallway, footsteps approached. The jury, they had forgotten Abina and were being escorted back briefly before heading to deliberation. The door opened, and they saw everything. Their judge, the man who had instructed them on justice, fairness, the rule of law, standing in front of the bench, handcuffed. One juror, middle-aged woman in a gray sweater, covered her mouth. Another, a young college student, instinctively pulled out his phone. Officer Hargrove, still seated at the defense table, stared in disbelief. The young arresting officer turned toward the jurors. "Baca, this is an active investigation." The gray sweater juror's voice trembled. "That's our judge." "Not anymore," the officer replied. Judge Ellington finally spoke, not to the officer but to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said steadily, "please remain calm. Remain calm." Even in cuffs, the older officer stepped closer to his partner. "We need to verify this." "I am verifying it," the younger one insisted. Procedural, procedural, Kala Ruiz snapped. You didn't even run his name. The young officer tightened his grip on the judge's arm. And that was the moment the jury's college student hit record. Every second. Captured. Within minutes. Courthouse security arrived. Then a supervisor. Then the police captain. Color drained from the captain's face when he saw who was in cuffs. What the hell are you doing? He hissed. Suspect matched description. That is Judge Ellington. The cuffs were removed. Quickly. Too quickly. As if speed could erase humiliation. Red marks remained around the judge's wrists. The captain turned to the jury. This is a misunderstanding. The gray-sweatered juror spoke quietly. We just watched you arrest a black judge in his own courtroom. No one had a response. Judge Ellington rubbed his wrists once, then straightened his robe. Escort the jury to deliberation, he said calmly. Sir, maybe we should postpone, the clerk whispered. No. His eyes met the jurors. Justice does not pause. The jury left, but they did not leave unchanged. In the deliberation room, the air felt different. They were supposed to discuss whether Officer Hargrove had used excessive force during a traffic stop. Now, they had witnessed something else. A system reacting to a black man in authority as if authority itself were impossible. The college student placed his phone on the table. I recorded it. Silence. The gray-sweatered woman exhaled slowly. We are being asked whether bias influenced an officer's actions. Another juror nodded, and we just saw Bias walk into a courtroom. Across the hall, Judge Ellington sat alone in chambers. No anger crossed his face, only something heavier. He had spent 25 years climbing through a system not designed for him, top of his class, federal prosecutor, Sen-appointed judge. He believed in procedure, in restraint, in dignity, and yet none of it had shielded him from being seen first as a suspect. A knock came at his door. It was the police captain. Judge, I am deeply sorry. The officer will be suspended pending investigation. Judge Ellington studied him quietly. Suspended, sir, for arresting a judge without verification. The captain swallowed. Yeah, Judge Ellington nodded once. Thank you. But his eyes said something else. Hours later, the jury returned. The courtroom filled again. Reporters buzzed. Word of the incident had already begun spreading online. The college student had sent the video to a friend. It was gaining traction. Officer Hargrove looked smaller somehow. Judge Ellington resumed the bench. No mention of what had happened. No visible anger. As the jury reached a verdict, the four persons stood. The gray-sweated woman. We have, Your Honor. The courtroom held its breath. In the matter of excessive force, we find the defendant guilty. A sharp inhale from the gallery. But she wasn't finished. And we recommend the maximum civil penalty allowable under state law. Gasps. Officer Hargrove's shoulders slumped. The jurors' faces were resolute. Judge Ellington nodded once. The court thanks the jury for its service. After dismissal, reporters swarmed outside. By evening, the video had gone viral. Headlines read, Black judge handcuffed in own courtroom. Jury witnesses arrest before delivering guilty verdict. Public outrage. The young officer's name was released. Internal investigations began. Civil rights organizations demanded reform. And 3 days later, the mayor held a press conference announcing sweeping procedural changes for courthouse detentions, but the most powerful moment came quietly. A week after the incident, the gray-sweated juror wrote a letter to Judge Ellington. In it, she said, I walked into that courtroom believing justice was abstract, something distant, something clean and theoretical. Then I saw you in handcuffs, and I understood what this case was truly about. Judge Ellington folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. He returned to the bench the following Monday. Same robe, same steady voice, but something had shifted, not in him, in the room, because everyone who entered now understood something undeniable. Authority did not erase bias. Position did not shield prejudice. And dignity, when challenged publicly, could expose a system more clearly than any argument ever could. As Judge Ellington called the next case forward, he glanced briefly at the faint marks still visible on his wrists. Then he lifted his chin. Court is now in session. And this time, when the doors opened, every officer who entered verified exactly who stood behind the bench. The next morning, the courthouse steps were lined with microphones. Satellite vans idled at the curb. Protesters gathered again, but this time their signs were different. Some read "Respect a robe," others read "Verify before you violate." Judge Marcus Ellington arrived the way he always did, alone, carrying his briefcase, walking through the front entrance without escort. Cameras flashed the moment he appeared. "Judge Ellington, do you feel you were targeted? Do you believe race played a role? Should the officer be fired?" He did not break stride. Inside, the atmosphere felt charged. Staff members stood a little straighter. Clerks lowered their voices when he passed. Even the marble floors seemed to echo differently beneath his steps. In chambers, Carla Ruiz was waiting. "You don't have to pretend this is normal," she said gently. "I'm not pretending," he replied. "You were humiliated." He paused before answering. "I was restrained." Carla's jaw tightened. "In your own courtroom?" "Yes. And you're just moving on." Judge Ellington set his briefcase down carefully. "If I allow anger to dictate my conduct, then yesterday becomes about me. And it isn't." "No," he said evenly. "It's about a system that revealed itself." She studied him for a long moment. The video hit 10 million views overnight. He didn't react. The juror who recorded it gave an interview. She said, "Watching you stay calm while being cuffed changed how she sees authority." A flicker crossed his eyes. Not pride, not satisfaction, understanding. Later that morning, the police chief arrived personally. He removed his hat before entering chambers. "Your Honor, the officer has been placed on administrative leave pending termination." "Pending?" Ellington asked quietly. "There are procedures." "There were procedures yesterday," the judge replied. The chief exhaled. "We're implementing mandatory verification before any courthouse detention. No officer acts alone inside a courtroom again." Judge Ellington nodded once. "That is appropriate." The chief hesitated. "Off the record, I'm ashamed." Silence settled between them. "Shame is useful," Ellington said finally, "if it leads to correction." By afternoon, the State Bar Association released a statement condemning the arrest. Civil rights leaders scheduled town halls. Law students across the country debated the footage in classrooms. But the most unexpected shift happened within the police department itself. Several officers quietly at first requested bias training beyond what was required. A few senior officers admitted they had once made assumptions in similar situations. The younger arresting officer, Thomas Avery, sat alone in an interrogation room giving his statement. "I followed the description," he insisted for the third time, "without confirming identity." Internal Affairs asked. He matched it. "Did you consider where you were?" Avery hesitated. "It was a courtroom, and the robe, I thought." "You thought what?" He had no answer. That didn't sound like the truth. Back at the courthouse, Judge Ellington resumed hearings as if nothing had fractured. But something had. Not his composure. The illusion. People now watched differently, listened differently. When officers testified, jurors' eyes lingered longer. Questions grew sharper. Assumptions were no longer invisible. One afternoon, as Ellington prepared to leave, he noticed a small group waiting near the exit. The gray-sweater juror stood at the front. She stepped forward nervously. "We didn't want to disturb you." "You're not," he said. "We just wanted to thank you for fulfilling your civic duty." She shook her head. For standing there. He held her gaze. "I've never seen dignity like that," she continued. "You didn't argue. You didn't shout. You just stood." He considered her words carefully. "Dignity," he said, "is not silence. It is control." Another juror, the college student, added quietly, "You changed how I see power." Ellington gave the faintest smile. Power is tested by how it responds when challenged. They left with something steadier than outrage. Weeks later, Officer Avery's termination became official. The announcement was brief. Klemnik of its impact was not. Departments across neighboring states revised courthouse engagement policies. Legal journals cited the incident in discussions about implicit bias and authorial perception. And, in a lecture hall, miles away, the viral video played again, this time paused on the frame where Judge Ellington's hands moved calmly behind his back. A professor asked her students, "What do you see?" One answered restraint. Another said, "Exposure." A third whispered, "Truth." Back in his courtroom, months after the incident, a new group of jurors filed in for a different case. Judge Ellington observed them quietly. They looked at him with recognition. Not because of status, because of what they had seen. He adjusted his robe, the fabric settling smoothly over healed skin. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice steady as ever, "the foundation of justice is not perfection. It is accountability." No one shifted. No one looked away. Outside those walls, debates would continue. Policies would evolve. Headlines would fade. But inside that courtroom, something permanent had been carved into memory. The sound of cuffs closing. The sight of authority questioned. The moment a jury walked back in and saw the truth standing in front of them. Judge Marcus Ellington lifted his gavel. Court is now in session. And this time, the silence felt different. Not heavy. Awake.